I smoothed the silk of my emerald green blouse for what felt like the 100th time, staring out the floor-to-ceiling window at the garden below. Balloons swayed gently in the October breeze, pastel pink and gold, and the scent of roses mixed with the sweet aroma of freshly baked cupcakes. Everything was perfect, the tables adorned with fine china, the crystal glasses catching the sunlight, my sister Emily's laughter drifting up from the patio where her friends had gathered. I had organized every detail, paid for every florist, hired the photographer, and secretly admired how effortlessly it all came together. I should have felt proud. And I did. Proud, but also painfully aware of what no one else seemed to notice: the empty chair at my table in life, the silence where a child's giggle might have been. Then, as I adjusted the centerpiece, my phone buzzed on the marble counter. I glanced down, expecting a sweet message from Emily or maybe a last-minute note from the caterer. But instead, I caught the sharp edge of laughter piercing through the crowd. Her friend, Vanessa, had spotted me. "Oh, look at you," Vanessa called out, loud enough for half the garden to hear. "All dressed up, planning parties, yet still no babies? How's that working out for you?" The champagne glass in my hand trembled slightly. Heat rose to my cheeks, and my fingers curled around the stem so tightly it threatened to crack. For a moment I froze. Pride waged war with humiliation. Anger and sorrow collided in my chest like two storms meeting, but beneath it all, a quiet, stubborn pulse of resolve began to thrum. I was more than this moment. More than her words. More than what anyone else thought I should be. I remember the day I first realized life wasn't going to follow the storybook I had imagined. I was 26, sitting on my childhood bedroom floor in my parents' house in Boston, knees pulled to my chest, a letter clutched in my hand. It wasn't a love letter or a rejection from a job. It was the infertility report, the kind that makes every dream of family suddenly feel like a ghost. My hand shook, and the lump in my throat made it impossible to breathe properly. "Why are you sitting there like that?" my mother asked, standing in the doorway with her pearls and perfectly styled hair. "Is something wrong?" I wanted to tell her. I wanted to scream that the body I trusted to give life was betraying me. But the words lodged somewhere between my teeth and my chest. Instead, I shook my head and forced a weak smile, a performance I'd perfected over the years. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. They both carried their disbelief and disappointment as casually as if I had forgotten to do the dishes. It was my grandmother, sitting quietly beside me later that evening, who finally broke through. She placed a wrinkled hand over mine and said, "Darling, the world may not hand you the story you imagined, but it doesn't mean your story is over. You have strength and you have choices. Don't let anyone else write your ending." That hand, that voice, that tiny spark of reassurance. It became my lifeline, a tether to hope I hadn't realized I'd needed. The next day, I made a decision. I would not collapse under the weight of pity or ridicule. I would not let their ignorance dictate my worth. I would carve out a life on my own terms, one defined by resilience, creativity, and success, rather than by a question I couldn't yet answer about motherhood. I left Boston soon after, suitcase in hand, heart heavy but determined. Every mile away felt like shedding a layer of fear, every step forward a rebellion against the expectations that had suffocated me. The symbolic bracelet my grandmother had pressed into my hand, an old silver band, etched with tiny stars, rested on my wrist. Every glance at it reminded me of that night, the night I chose courage over despair, independence over approval. And though the ache of infertility lingered like a shadow, it no longer had the power to define me. I was ready to build a life that was mine and mine alone. Boston receded in my rearview mirror, and with every mile, I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. New York City loomed ahead, a place teeming with ambition, glitter, and endless opportunity. I didn't have a detailed plan, just a suitcase, my grandmother's silver bracelet glinting against my wrist, and a fierce determination not to fail. I found a small apartment in the East Village, modest but mine, with sunlight spilling through the narrow windows in the morning. I furnished it sparingly, each item carefully chosen: A sturdy desk where I could work late into the night, a leather chair that creaked with effort but supported long hours, and a tiny plant on the sill that stubbornly thrived, reminding me that growth was possible even in tight spaces. Then I met her, Clara Donovan, a seasoned marketing consultant with sharp eyes and an uncanny ability to see potential. I stumbled into her office, resume in hand, nerves on fire, expecting rejection. Instead, she asked, "Why aren't you working for yourself yet?" Her question stung and inspired at the same time. Over the next few months, she became my mentor, my guide through a maze of challenges I hadn't imagined. She taught me strategy, negotiation, and the subtle art of reading people, a skill I had ignored in my early 20s, distracted by hurt and self-doubt. The first months were brutal. I remember nights staring at my laptop, coffee cold at my elbow, eyes straining against the dim light. I doubted myself constantly. Could I really build a business from scratch? Could I prove to the world and to myself that I was more than the woman who couldn't have children? And then came the small victories. My first freelance client paid me more than I dared expect. The first contract I secured felt like a triumph, not just of skill, but of survival. Every paycheck, every thank you email, every hesitant compliment built a quiet fire inside me. I documented none of it on social media. My family believed I was scraping by, struggling in ways they could imagine. The truth was far different. I was building an empire quietly, with patience and precision. As the years passed, my confidence solidified. I rented a studio office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline and decorated it with pieces that spoke to my journey, abstract art that reflected complexity, photographs from trips I had saved for, awards that were mine because I had earned them. No one in Boston knew the full scope of my success. They saw occasional posts about work dinners or minimal achievements, but the real story remained my secret, tucked behind carefully curated glimpses. Through it all, I held on to my grandmother's bracelet. Every time I felt doubt creeping in, every time I heard echoes of past judgments, I touched the silver stars. They reminded me of that night on my bedroom floor, of the choice I had made, and of the power I had quietly amassed. My life was no longer defined by loss or insult. It was defined by courage, persistence, and an unshakable sense of self. And as I prepared Emily's baby shower, balancing laughter, champagne, and carefully folded napkins, I carried a hidden strength that no one, not even Vanessa, could touch. The garden was alive with laughter and soft chatter as guests mingled, champagne glasses clinking in the afternoon sun. Emily floated between friends, radiant in her blush-pink dress, her excitement nearly tangible. I watched her from the doorway, adjusting the folds of my emerald blouse one last time, feeling the familiar tug of nerves and anticipation. Then I saw Vanessa approaching, her heels clicking sharply on the stone path, an amused smirk on her lips. She had been the source of last week's humiliation, and yet, here she was, entirely confident that the same woman she had mocked would offer nothing more than awkward smiles and polite conversation. I met her gaze directly, a slow, deliberate acknowledgement that she had underestimated me. "Vanessa," I said, my voice smooth, calm, yet carrying the weight of authority. She blinked, a flicker of unease crossing her face, but she brushed it aside. "Well, aren't you just dazzling today?" she said, the sarcasm thinly veiled. I smiled, a small curve of my lips, and invited her inside my office corner, a quiet, secluded space I had arranged earlier. It was subtle, yet deliberate. My laptop open with sleek charts, a shelf lined with awards and plaques, and the city skyline stretching behind me. Vanessa's eyes widened as she took in the details, the air thick with tension. "Funny," I said softly, "how sometimes we assume we know someone's life, and then reality catches up." She looked at me, confused, her bravado faltering. "I run my own marketing firm," I continued, letting my words settle slowly. "We manage campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, have offices in 3 states, and our latest project, just wrapped this week, hit record-breaking numbers. The apartment you've always pictured me struggling in?" I moved into a penthouse 6 months ago. And as for finances, I let a subtle gesture toward my awards and stock portfolio documents do the talking. I've built my independence quietly, without needing anyone's approval. The words hit like an unexpected storm. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed, disbelief flooding her features. Emily stepped into the doorway, catching the tail end of the scene. Her expression froze, a mix of admiration and surprise shining through. Vanessa started, but I raised a hand, a gentle but unyielding signal to let the truth land fully before she spoke. You thought this, I said, nodding toward her incredulous gaze, was a limitation. You thought my life could be summed up by what I don't have, rather than what I've earned. I paused, letting the quiet stretch, then added, and yet, here I am. Not struggling. Not waiting for approval. Not defined by what anyone else thinks I should be. Her eyes darted around, taking in the trophies, the organized files, the subtle touches of elegance. The realization settled. The woman they had underestimated, the one mocked so cruelly, had quietly built a life of power, independence, and dignity. Emily, finally finding her voice, said softly, I had no idea, sis. I reached for a glass of champagne, the crystal cool against my palm, and allowed myself a small, victorious smile. Not gloating, not vindictive, but confident in a truth Vanessa had never imagined. My worth was mine alone, untouchable and undeniable. For the first time that afternoon, the weight of past judgments lifted. I wasn't the woman people thought I was. I was better, stronger, unseen but unstoppable. The air in the office corner felt charged, almost electric. Vanessa's mouth remained slightly open, her earlier smirk replaced by hesitation, as if she were slowly realizing the depth of her misjudgment. I leaned against the desk, calm, composed, radiating a quiet authority that I had cultivated over years of silent persistence. I think it's time we set a few boundaries, I said, letting my voice carry an even mix of firmness and compassion. Vanessa's eyes flicked nervously to Emily, who had moved closer but stayed silent, waiting to see how I would navigate this moment. First, I continued, words of power. What you said last week, mocking me for something I cannot control, is unacceptable. If you wish to continue being part of my life or Emily's, I expect respect. Full stop. Vanessa opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a finger gently, letting her know interruptions wouldn't be tolerated. Second, I said, turning to Emily, you've been swept up in the excitement of your new role as a mother, and rightly so. But part of growing into this next chapter is understanding boundaries, too. I've supported you wholeheartedly, and I always will, but I need honesty, appreciation, and thoughtfulness. We cannot let small cruelties undermine what we have. Emily nodded, her eyes glistening slightly, realizing the gravity behind my words. I paused, letting the moment breathe, then spoke the most important condition of all. And for myself, moving forward, I will no longer hide who I am, nor tolerate anyone diminishing my worth. My success, my independence, my happiness, they are non-negotiable. If you wish to engage with me or our family, it must be on the basis of mutual respect, personal growth, and emotional accountability. No excuses, no judgment, and no mockery. Vanessa's expression shifted from disbelief to unease, then finally to the faintest hint of reflection. For the first time, I sensed a crack in her armor, a recognition that power and confidence are built, not borrowed. I'm not here to punish anyone, I said softly, the warmth returning to my voice. I care about my family, about the people I've loved for years, but care must be reciprocal. If you wish to remain in my life, then you must meet me halfway. That means learning, evolving, and letting go of toxicity. Everyone has the opportunity to step into their best version, and I will support that growth, but only if it is genuine. The garden outside buzzed with laughter and the soft clink of champagne, oblivious to the quiet shift taking place in the corner. I could see Vanessa processing, Emily listening, and myself finally embracing the power I had earned, not through confrontation, but through years of resilience, determination, and unshakable self-worth. And in that moment, I realized the true victory wasn't just in proving them wrong. It was in defining the rules of engagement on my own terms. I was no longer a passive participant in anyone else's assumptions. I had the upper hand, not through malice, but through clarity, self-respect, and the quiet insistence that my life, my choices, and my happiness were mine alone to command. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the familiar glint of my grandmother's silver bracelet against my wrist. The stars etched into the band seemed to shine brighter than ever, a reminder that every step I had taken, the long nights, the doubts, the moments of fear, had led me to this place of unshakable power. The garden had quieted as the afternoon waned, the sun casting a golden glow over pastel balloons and scattered petals. Emily had retreated to check on the cake, her tiny hands brushing crumbs from her dress, while Vanessa lingered awkwardly, her expression softened by reflection. I took a slow breath, letting the warmth of accomplishment settle in my chest. Over the next few hours, I watched subtle changes unfold. Vanessa began asking thoughtful questions about my work, genuinely curious rather than sarcastic. Her tone shifted from judgment to interest, and I realized she was trying, tentatively but sincerely, to understand a life she had once mocked. Emily, too, grew quieter, more attentive, and her gratitude toward me radiated in small gestures, a whispered thank you, a lingering hug, a glance that said more than words ever could. I smiled to myself, adjusting the silver bracelet on my wrist. The stars glinted as if winking in approval, reminding me of that night years ago, sitting on my bedroom floor in Boston, heart heavy but determined. Every choice I had made since then, the leap to independence, the long nights of building my career, the quiet victories, had brought me here. Not just to success, but to clarity, to self-respect, and to relationships rooted in authenticity. By the time the last guest left, the air had changed. Laughter still lingered in the corners, but it carried a new tone, one of understanding, of growth, and of mutual respect. I walked through the now empty garden, touching the roses lightly, feeling the residual energy of love, celebration, and reconciliation. Sitting by the window with a glass of champagne, I reflected on the journey. The ache of infertility was still there, a shadow I had learned to live with, but it no longer dictated my worth. I had become a woman defined not by absence, but by presence. Presence in my work, in my home, and in my life. I lifted my wrist, tracing the silver stars with my fingers. "You were right, Grandma," I whispered, the faintest smile tugging at my lips. Life isn't about the story we think we'll get. It's about the life we build with courage and grace. And in that quiet moment, I understood the full measure of strength. It wasn't in proving anyone wrong, nor in flaunting achievements. It was in knowing my value, standing firm in it, and nurturing relationships on the basis of respect, love, and authenticity. I raised my glass to the empty garden, to the challenges endured, and to the woman I had become. Alone, yet whole. Resilient, yet tender. Powerful, yet compassionate. And finally, I allowed myself to savor the truth that no one, not even the harshest voice in the room, could take this life, this strength, or this grace from me. Bottom of form,